are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Rejoining me for our Thursday episode, my co-host Nick Lee. We've officially reached the conclusion of training camp. The Seahawks having their final official training camp practice on Thursday. They're going to shift into regular season mode after Saturday's preseason finale against the Chargers. So we are easing closer and closer to the season opener in Indianapolis. That's great news for football fans. That's great news for those of us that are tired of watching preseason football. I know I am not alone feeling that way this year. So we're going to start gearing up for the regular season. A lot of talk about the 53-man roster. The final cutdowns have to be turned in by Tuesday, August 31st. A lot of teams are going to get them in on Sunday after they play their preseason games. So we'll be checking that out the next couple of days and sharing some observations from the last two training camp practices. This episode is brought your way by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. We are now done with training camp, but Duane Brown never played a single practice snap during the past 3.5 weeks. He's been orchestrating a hold-in, seeking a new contract. The Seahawks apparently, though, are hoping to have that come to an end here in the very near future. According to Mike Garafolo of NFL Network, the Seahawks have engaged in some discussions recently with the veteran left tackle, trying to figure out a way to get him back onto the practice field. Now, based on what I've been told, Nick, they are still very hesitant to give the soon-to-be 36-year-old offensive lineman an extension beyond 2021. It all revolves around his age and the fact that he's had some durability issues in the past couple of seasons. You can understand the Seahawks' viewpoint there, but it sounds like they are willing to sweeten the pot for this year. There are a number of ways they can do that, as we'll break down in a moment, but basically they're looking at ways they can give more bonus money to Duane Brown in 2021 to make sure they appease their tackle. And then after the season, they can revisit another contract to bring him back in the future.
Yeah, I get the hesitancy on the Seahawks side, but I'm a little wary of using the age and durability as, a leverage against Duane Brown. He did play 16 games last year. I know some of that was banged up, but tackles can last a while in this league now, especially with the type of shape he stays in, doing 20 more pull-ups in 3 sets more than I can do at his age. The only pull-ups I do are around my 3-year-old's waist for bedtime. And it's, that makes me a little worried. He did miss some significant time in 2019. I do understand the whole moving around bonus money. Obviously, you're not going to slap, a 4-year extension on the guy with his age, but giving him a bonus on his contract, moving some money around, making sure that he gets more money up front. Because in reality, he's going to get $10 million this year if he plays, and that's going to be really hard to turn down. He is a top-tier tackle still when he's healthy, and I think he should be fairly compensated for that. But that doesn't also mean that the Seahawks should sell the farm and, or at least mortgage the farm to make sure he's, locked up for 3-4 years. So I do think going the route of bonus, moving some money around instead of a long-air extension is a smart move. I'm at the point now where the Seahawks know what they're doing. The Seahawks have earned at least my trust. And especially with the Jamal Adams thing, people started getting worried. I never really got super worried, and they know what they're doing. They've earned our trust, and I think that the relationship is good. It's a hold in. I know that's a new phrase this year, that's something that hasn't really come to my ears until this year. It's not really hold out. It's not, these two sides are bitter, throwing jabs at each other on social media, much like you've seen in other teams in those situations here in Seattle. So I think the relationship still is there. And it's a positive. I think it's a positive relationship. I think that there will be a positive outcome from this, even if that doesn't mean he'll be extended beyond this year.
And I've talked about it several times in this podcast over the past few months. I believe the Seahawks would be wise to extend Duane Brown beyond this season. And I don't think they should be giving him a 3 or 4 year extension. I'm with you on that. You can't afford to do that. You don't want to get overextended. But I don't see what's wrong with extending him to 2022, at least slapping an extra year on his contract, and you can give him more money. The salary cap is going to be going up over the next several seasons. So I think the Seahawks would be wise to do that. But based on what I've been told, and again, I understand this logic from the Seahawks perspective, they just are concerned with giving a player of that age. And again, he had knee surgery 2 years ago, was dealing with a bicep injury. He's generally been pretty durable. We know players can break down quickly in this league. And so they want to safeguard themselves. So they really have been hesitant to extend him. I just look at the depth, and we'll be talking about this in the third quarter later. I look at the depth at tackle right now, and if you don't have Duane Brown at their left tackle in week one, if I'm Russell Wilson, I'm extremely worried. And if I'm the Seahawks, I'm extremely worried because I just don't think they have another quality starter, at least right now. They have a player in Stone Forsythe that might develop into a starting left tackle in this league, but he is not ready for that right now. So they don't have the luxury to be able to play hardball too much. But you mentioned the $10 million. Duane Brown is going to be out there in week one. The question just, when is he going to be coming back to practice and actually participating? He might wait until the week beforehand. And he's in outstanding shape, and he's been through the rigors of a season, so he should be able to do that and hold up just fine against the Colts in week one. I'm just kind of curious about the decision-making process as far as not being willing to give him an extra year. There are some options out there. They could use the void year strategy that we've seen the Seahawks use quite a bit in this COVID offseason, and they could tack on a void season, push some of that signing bonus up to this year, and then Duane Brown, you could add another $2 or $3 million to his contract, and that might be enough to get him right back on the practice field. And you could tell him, hey, we'll see how the season plays out, and we'll give you a new contract if things work out. They just are safeguarding against the fact that he is an older player. I understand where both sides come from here. At this stage of his career, Brown wants to make sure he has some security too. He wants to finish his career in Seattle, but he also wants to make sure he's paid accordingly, and he's earned that money. One thing to dispute the aging tackles, you mentioned that players are lasting longer at the tackle position. Andrew Whitworth really is a unicorn in that regard because Duane Brown and Whitworth are the only two starting left tackles or starting tackles, period, in this league right now that are 34 years old or older. There still are very few players that age into their mid-30s and continue to play well at the tackle position. Maybe Jason Peters ends up starting for the Bears because of the injuries that they have, but there are not very many of them. And so you can understand Seattle's hesitancy. At the same time, Duane Brown can say, look what I can do with these pull-ups and the incredible shape I'm in. I've got 3 or 4 great seasons left of me. He might be in that same DNA as Andrew Whitworth, where he can play at a high level into his late 30s, early 40s. So this is going to be fascinating to see what happens. I believe that the two sides are going to strike a deal that revolves around sweetening his 2021 contract. I think they're going to find a way to add some bonus money like they did with Marshawn Lynch in 2014. They gave him an extra $1.5 million in salary that year. I expect something very similar to get Duane Brown back on the field. And who knows, maybe by December, maybe the two sides, if Brown's had a great season, they'll agree to terms on a 1 or 2 year extension late, or they could just wait to the offseason and try to work things out. But you can understand where both sides are coming from. It'll be interesting to see what ultimately plays out here. I expect Brown will be back on the practice field soon, though, because he's not going to miss out on that $10 million. When we come back in the second quarter, we're going to be taking a look at some things that happened on the practice field the last couple of days. The Seahawks wrapping up their training camp at the VMAC. I'll be sharing some observations. The two of us will be chatting about some players that stood out the past couple of days. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey everyone, this is Corbin Smith from the Locked On Seahawks podcast, here to let you know our episode today is supported by Alaska Airlines. Do you ever get the sudden urge to hop on a plane and head somewhere like Dubai, London, or Tokyo? I've always dreamed of going to London. There are so many attractions to see, including the Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, and St. Paul's Cathedral. The city is also full of historical landmarks such as the British Museum and Churchill's War Room. Being an avid fish and chips lover, I've always been eager to test out the food scene there as well. Now it's easier than ever to get there because Alaska Airlines has joined One World. One World is a global alliance that makes it easy for Alaska Mileage Plan members to earn and redeem miles worldwide. Go global with Alaska Airlines and One World. Learn more at alaskaair.com/oneworld. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Thursday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith, joined for today's episode by Nick Lee. It's time to break down the last two training camp practices for the Seahawks of the 2021 season, wrapping things up at the VMAC today. A disclaimer for our listeners, since the practices have not been open for the last couple of days, there haven't been fans in attendance. I'm very limited on what I can share from what I was able to observe on the practice field. Can't talk about specific formations, can't discuss personnel groupings, the number of reps, first, second, third team, all of those types of specifics. We can talk about some of the plays, though, that happened on the practice field. Let's talk Duane Eskridge first, because we didn't get to see the second-round pick out of Western Michigan for the first 2.5 weeks. He was on the PUP list, recovering from a toe injury. They've slowly eased him back in. Finally got a chance, Nick, to see what this electric playmaking rookie can do. In Wednesday's practice, he caught a touchdown on a slant in the red zone period where, coming out of his break, it looked like he was shot out of a cannon, blew right by Trey Flowers. And then later in practice, from the slot, gets open against free safety Ashari Crosswell. And honestly, Crosswell was in decent position. It just looked like Eskridge, once he got to the safety, he just flipped on a light switch, and suddenly there was 10 yards of separation. Russell Wilson throws a perfect deep ball in stride, and Eskridge goes the distance for the long touchdown. You could see Shane Waldron with that Grinch-like grin behind the huddle after this play happened, and just hasn't had a chance to see that yet. But this is an exciting development for this offense. He looks 100% and ready to play in games.
Yeah, there's probably John Schneider over there with the excellent Smithers. You know, this draft pick is working out perfectly. You know, that is exactly what I envisioned when they selected D. Eskridge, as he now wants to be called. It's that we always discuss the 40 time, and you and I both agree when we both played high school football, even though that's a totally different level than the NFL. But there is a difference between running the 40 and being fast and being football fast. There's a difference between guys that are just, the Tyreek Hills are football fast and fast, and DK Metcalf, same thing. But some of the guys, test really high, and then all of a sudden, when they get pads on, they start running routes. They don't look as fast. Duane Eskridge, D. Eskridge, could be a guy that is football fast, that actually lives up to his 40 time, if not more so, with pads on and the ball in his hand, because that is exactly what I envisioned, is Russell Wilson with the best deep ball in football going to Duane Eskridge burning secondaries right and left. That is exactly what I envisioned. And I know that it's kind of gotten Cold War-ish with some of the stuff you can and can't share as far as formations and whatnot and the positions. But in this offense that we're all we've observed for the preseason and what we kind of assume Shane Waldron will bring to the regular season, you could see multiple opportunities for D. Eskridge to showcase his skills in space and vertically. And I'm just extremely excited that he's on the practice field, because I mentioned a week or two ago on the show that I wasn't quite sure if he was going to make it in the preseason. I don't know if he was going to play against the Chargers, but now he looks like he could very well be part of the mix to play against the Chargers if they so wish, at least healthy enough and game ready enough. Because, boy, every Seahawks fan is chomping at the bit to see their highest draft pick of 2021 on the field for the first time.
Yeah, and I think there's a good chance. Pete Carroll's been non-committal about this, but I think with the way he's looked this week, that there's a really good chance that we could see D. Eskridge on the field making his team debut. They'll make sure he gets some game action before the regular season gets here against Indianapolis. And I think that's really important for a first-year player, regardless of draft status, especially since he missed a large chunk of training camp. You want to give him those game reps because those simply cannot be replaced. So it's been exciting seeing what he's been doing. He had a big play on a bubble screen in a practice last week too. So there were signs that he was healthy and he was ready to go. But this week he really had his bust out party, and Wednesday's practice, he was spectacular. Now, going to the defensive side of the football, the Seahawks just made this trade a couple days ago with the Houston Texans. They dealt a conditional 7th-round pick to Houston for cornerback John Reed, former Penn State standout. He was a 3-time All-Big Ten selection. This is a kid that's got really good athletic tools, a high football IQ. Really struggled, though, since coming into the league. But, man, as Ken Norton Jr. said, if you're going to make a good first impression, that's exactly what this kid did. And what I was most impressed by, John Reed is not a big corner. He's like 5'10", 180 pounds, and he's got sub 31-inch arms, but he's gotten a lot of reps against DK Metcalf the last 2 days, and he's honestly held his own, especially in Wednesday's practice. Had a pass breakup in coverage against Metcalf during the red zone period, and then during the team session, he once again was matched up against the big wide receiver, and he was able to stick to his hip in coverage on a hitch, and Metcalf ultimately ended up slipping, and the pass was way short. So it was great coverage. You could see teammates cheering him on the sidelines. So couldn't have asked for a better debut, and today it was tougher to really evaluate him because they weren't in pads anymore. But Wednesday, he really looked good. So now my question is, being such a late arrival, is he going to be able to do enough in this upcoming preseason game? Trey Brown being out right now certainly expands his chances of sticking on the roster, but is he going to be able to do enough in this game and continue playing like he did Wednesday? If so, the Seahawks might have themselves another Justin Coleman type trade that happens late in training camp, and we know how that one worked out for him.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I know a ton about John Reed as far as, I've watched his whole career or anything like that, but everything I've read and everything I've seen and just on some of the highlights I've watched, he doesn't back down from a challenge. He does not back down from guys who appear physically imposing, like DK Metcalf, who's, if you look up physically imposing in the dictionary, there's DK Metcalf. He's always been praised for his IQ, his competitiveness, and his physicality. And shoot, if you have, the Seahawks might as well stock up on guys like that. Kind of a DJ Reed, where, maybe not the biggest, most gifted corner on the planet, but you got that edge, you got that chip, you got that just ball playing ability, that aggressiveness, that just want to, that can play. And I think he's going to get a real good shot at showing it here. And, we say all the time, the best ability is availability. And if he's available and other guys that they're counting on, like Trey Brown or not, shoot, why not give him a chance?
Let's talk about one other player that I think has a lot riding on this upcoming preseason game. That is undrafted rookie linebacker John Ratigan, who arrived out of Army. And this guy has a much different case than the rest of Seattle's undrafted rookies coming in, because if Ratigan gets cut and doesn't make in the NFL, he has to go back to the Army. And so that's a much different situation than any of the other players that are on Seattle's roster. And he's been out almost all of training camp because of a hamstring injury. I thought for sure at that point, just the fact he hasn't been healthy, there's no way he's making this team. But with Ben Burr-Kirven tearing his ACL last weekend, I know Nick Bellor's got experience starting at linebacker in this league, and he could play there for the Seahawks if they needed him to. He's looked good in the preseason games. But they don't have very much depth at that position right now. And John Ratigan is a really solid athlete, 240 pounds, has decent size as an off-ball linebacker as well. And he might have made the play of camp today during a 7-on-7 drill in the red zone. Russell Wilson was the quarterback and reached up with one hand in the end zone and intercepted him. You could hear oohs and ahs on the sideline from other reporters. A couple guys had their jaws dropped. I mean, it really was a sensational interception. And as I mentioned, this guy is pretty athletic. He's got good size, really high football IQ, as Pete Carroll has talked about unprompted a few times. If Ben Burr-Kirven didn't get hurt, then I think you're looking at a guy that at this point is just trying to get a few good practices in. So maybe Seattle might keep him around on the practice squad. But if he plays really well in this game with the lack of depth they have, and he's able to do some things in special teams, even with the lack of camp practices, suddenly he's alive again to potentially make this roster.
Yeah, you make a good point. I think the opportunity has just fallen in his lap with BBK going on IR, and of course, unfortunately for him, and the guy just made plays at Army, and those guys have a heavy regimen, that they have a strict schedule. They're very disciplined. They're very smart individuals. Second, he wasn't just smart. He played a heck of a football season for Army. Second team All-American by USA Today, 78 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions. He was everywhere. He was one of the most productive defensive players in college football in 2020, as BBK was when he was at UW. So that he kind of fits that profile of a guy who can just make plays, make tackles. He's not going to be the most gifted, starting linebacker in this league probably, but certainly a guy that you can maybe count on in special teams. Really just all the roles BPK had, I think that that's a pretty good fit as a replacement if he continues to play well. But obviously, there's a lot of names in that hat. But if he has a strong showing here, which sounds like he did at camp today, or a couple days for these last couple of days, and if he has a strong game against the Chargers, that's going to be another opportunity for him to make this team, because the opportunity's there now that BBK is hurt, and it's just a matter of, can he seize it for more than just a good practice or two.
Speaking of seizing opportunities, when we come back for our final quarter on today's show, we've done this a few times periodically during training camp. We've had different formats each time, and you and I are big NCAA tournament fans in men's and women's basketball, and so we're going to actually, in the middle of August, we're going to delve into something that's big during March Madness, and that's Bubble Watch. We're going to be looking at 3 offensive position groups and discussing which players are locks, which ones should be on the 53-man roster, and which players still have work to do with one preseason game left to play. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's that time of year again, and all eyes are now turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron to start the NFL and college football season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. Get all the updated odds, props, contests, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest open now at BetOnline. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus. Be sure to take advantage of their opening day super promo. Make a bet on Thursday, September 9th, the season opener between the Buccaneers and the Cowboys. And if you lose, your wager will be refunded up to $25 for new customers only when signing up and using the promo code NFL100. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports, from football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait. Take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Thursday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined by Nick Lee. The men's NCAA tournament, as well as the women's NCAA tournament in basketball, doesn't happen until March, but we're going to actually take a little bit of a page out of March Madness for today's show, with the Seahawks set to cut their roster from 80 players down to 53 by next Tuesday. There are a lot of players that unfortunately are going to be done playing for the Seahawks after this weekend's game against the Chargers. A few of those players will get added to the practice squad and maybe have a chance to compete next year in training camp. But there are going to be several of these players that are on the outside looking in, and they don't play for the Seahawks again. So it's going to be a big game for a number of players. We're going to look on the offensive side of the football and play a little bit of bubble watch, and how this is going to work at each position group. We're going to be breaking down the players that are locks that we know are going to be on the 53-man roster, the players that should be in, have the resume that they should be on the roster, barring a miracle, and players that still have work to do with this last preseason game coming up. So let's start at the running back position. And you and I discussed this before the show. I think in the lock category, there are only 2 players right now that have truly locked up a roster spot because of how competitive this position group is. Chris Carson is obviously going to be the starter. There's a reason they're keeping him in bubble wrap right now, and he's not going to play in the preseason finale. They want him ready for week 1. And I think DJ Dallas is the other player. He's been so darn good on special teams. He can catch the football like a receiver. He's ran the ball well when he's had a few opportunities during the preseason. Right now, you can make an argument he might be the number 2 running back, given what he has done during the preseason and in training camp practices. You add in the fact that he's got a lot of tools that fit well as a third down running back. I think that those 2 running backs are the ones that have spots locked up, but everybody else here is either should be in or has work to do with this last preseason game coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird to talk about. Rashad Penny, it should be in, and you said barring a miracle, I'd say barring disaster, I guess, wouldn't make it. He's disappointed at about every turn, and I don't know what else that, how many other opportunities he's going to get besides these next few weeks to really maybe not get cut, but be a significant part of this offense. The other guys are getting reps ahead of him and getting praise by offensive coaches, and that he's not. And maybe we're reading a bit too much into that, but you don't hear the glowing reviews of Penny like you had for the other running backs. Certainly DJ Dallas, who I think is maybe one of the, if you talk about, a couple MVPs of preseason, DJ Dallas is absolutely in that conversation, and has played himself well onto the roster and well into that offensive scheme. Rashad Penny certainly is in that, he doesn't maybe have work to do to make the roster. If nothing else happens, he'll probably still be on the roster. But, he comes into the game and, fumbles 3 times against the Chargers, or heaven forbid get hurt. I obviously don't want that to happen, but he has just not been able to stay healthy. Stuff like that can happen. And that would spell absolute doom, I think, for his chances at the roster. But if nothing changes, status quo, he should be in. That's kind of the point of that. And the guys that certainly have some work to do, Travis Homer, DJ Dallas, his former teammate at Miami, has definitely lapped him. And that's partially because Homer's been on the PUP list and hasn't gotten the same exposure that Dallas has. Alex Collins is also kind of fallen behind in the race. And then you have Josh Johnson, who's, still kind of a wild card. I wonder if it's one of those classic, they're not quite sure if they can stick him on the practice squad if they cut him kind of thing. But the running backs, there's 2 clear guys, like you mentioned, then a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I think Homer is the big wild card of this group just because we haven't seen him. He's only been back in the practice field the last couple of days. I don't think he's going to play in the preseason finale because he's barely gotten any reps during their team sessions. He's not ready for that. They just got him back out on the field. And so I'm just curious how that ends up playing out because Pete Carroll is a big fan of Travis Homer. He was gushing about him the other day, and I don't think it was one of those just coach speak type things. He's always been a fan of Travis Homer. Alex Collins has had ball security issues in practice, and that's been a problem throughout his career. He's had fumbleitis. So that's the one thing that's holding him back. Otherwise, he's had a really good camp. A week and a half ago, I thought he was for certain on this roster. But now I got to wonder just because the players that they have in that position. And Josh Johnson, as you mentioned, maybe Seattle looks at him as a guy. There are a number of teams that have running backs that are banged up. If he gets released, he might not get through waivers. There may be another team out there that would like to add him. He has done some nice things in these preseason games, despite playing behind second, third, and fourth string offensive linemen. And I guess that's where I would go with Rashad Penny here. Rashad Penny has looked good on the practice field. His preseason snaps the other day, he had absolutely nothing to work with when he ran the football. So fans that are complaining about where he's at, that is my disclaimer here, is that he was running behind second, third string linemen even in the first half. There weren't many starters that were playing for either side of the football for the Seahawks, and that included the offensive line. Didn't have anything to work with. When he's had something to work with in practice, he's looked explosive. He's looked healthy. So I would wait and see what happens in this game when he gets some carries. I expect him to get plenty of playing time in this game since Chris Carson isn't going to play. But certainly you've got a number of backs right now that are vying for maybe 2 spots on the roster. I don't see them keeping more than 4 running backs. Now let's go to the receiver position. I think your 2 Pro Bowlers are probably locks, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I think they're pretty safe on this roster. We talked about Eskridge being your second-round pick. He is now back, looked really good this week. He's obviously going to be on the roster. And I'm going to include Freddie Swain on the locks at this point because he's been really good throughout camp. He gives them an element out of the slot that maybe some of their other receivers don't. He's got some special teams value. Did some nice things last year. He's been healthy throughout camp. So I think those 4 are locks, and that means you've got 1 or 2 spots open. I'm going to still include Penny harder than should be in just because he was so impressive before he injured his ankle. And he came back this week and looked great. He's healthy. He's back from that ankle sprain that he missed a couple weeks with. And he made some explosive plays the last couple of days. Russell Wilson trusts him. Pete Carroll trusts him. He's a special teams guru as well. He, to me, is 95% a lock to be on this team. So now the question is if they're going to be a 6th receiver. Which other player steps up in this game? Because there's 3 or 4 guys that you could include that maybe have an outside shot at making this team. There is decent depth at the receiver position.
Yeah, he used the T word, trust, and that's what they have in Hart. He built up enough of a lead, I guess, to say before he went down with an injury to where I think that his spot should be okay. His special teams ability, like you mentioned, is definitely helping his case. And, Cody Thompson, certainly he can fill multiple roles. He's one of those, like, whatever you need coach kind of guys, which you always love in any kind of level of football. And the coaches clearly like him. and he even got some time with the ones in some of the practices, and he clearly has favor there. But I think it's just a matter of other guys have shown more, that the other guys are shining more. Not that he's doing anything perhaps totally wrong. He's just maybe not risen to the level of other guys on the team. All right, excuse me, in that room. And Aaron Fuller, kind of the similar situation where, he hasn't been able to showcase his whole, repertoire. He's had a couple nice moments in some games, but really other guys are just straight up moving the needle more right now. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take more than what he's done to make the roster. And Cade Johnson, same thing. He's been pretty much, the guy that we expected with some of the talent and ability he has. And we both had him going, early day 3 in the NFL draft. And he has that kind of skill and athletic ability. And he also has not really had that, signature moment. That's, he's had a couple good, leads the team in, I think, with 7 receptions, and that's with some horrible quarterback play. So those guys have some work to do. I think it's just the other guys have shown out more, and they're going to need, it could come down to between the 3-4 of those guys who has if one of them has an excellent game against the Chargers, that might be the guy.
I still think this is between Thompson and Johnson, in my opinion. And Aaron Fuller is right in the mix as well. I just feel like the upside from the other two guys. Thompson's a guy that was so productive at Toledo. He's a solid special teams player. He's gotten a lot of reps throughout camp with the first team. He's been in the organization now for a couple of years. Shane Waldron seems to trust him. So I think if they're going to have a 6th receiver spot, we don't know yet if they're going to keep that many, but I think right now Thompson's got the slight edge because of what he's done in practice, but Cade Johnson's right there. And if Johnson has a big preseason finale, then I think he will leapfrog him. That's how close this is. And maybe Aaron Fuller with a big game can position himself as well. But you got 3 players vying for one spot, in my opinion, and that makes it a very fascinating position to watch in this preseason finale. Last but not least, let's go to the offensive line. And this is one that I didn't necessarily know that we were going to be having the discussion that we're about to have, because I think when camp opened, the general consensus was that you're going to have your main 4 guys be Duane Brown, Brandon Shell, Stone Forsythe, and Cedric Ogbuehi, who played really well in 3 starts at the end of the year last season. Keep those 4 as your tackles, maybe Jamarco Jones on the roster as well, who can play tackle and guard. But here we are, and I think only 3 of those players are locks. And really the main reason Forsythe I have in that category, because they believe he could be a starter down the road. He is not ready right now, but he is not going to get cut. Duane Brown is going to return. He's going to be your starting left tackle. Brandon Shell is going to be your starter at right tackle. After that, though, I don't have any more locks because Cedric Ogbuehi and Jamarco Jones have not been available. They have been injured most of training camp, and there's an undrafted rookie by the name of Jake Curran who has played really well in these first 2 preseason games that is under club control at an affordable rate for the next 3 years minimum. Jones and Ogbuehi are going to be free agents after this year. I don't know that you can sneak Jake Curran to the practice squad because there's a lot of teams in the league that need tackle help. And if he's available, given how well he's played, being a 4-year starter at Cal, I think somebody else is going to sweep him up. I don't think the Seahawks want to lose him. So this suddenly becomes a very fascinating race to watch here going into this preseason finale.
Well, you know who's going to need tackle help if Duane Brown goes down? The Seahawks. They need all the depth they can get. And, yeah, the tiebreaker will always be, expensive or not, in club control or not, the length of club control and how expensive are they. And he's going to win that argument between Ogbuehi and Jones, absolutely, hands down, every time. And you like the whole 4-year starter at Cal, a very academic school. He's going to be, he's gotten praise for his football IQ, and I've liked him a little. I've liked him in a little bit. I've seen him play, and again, if it comes down to availability, which we know is the best ability, he's been more available, and we've seen what Jamarco Jones is. He's a very solid, versatile offensive lineman when he's healthy, and that's a big win and a big if. Cedric Ogbuehi, kind of a similar situation. So if all else is equal, go for the younger, cheaper option right now.
Yeah, I think this game is going to be huge, determining who the last tackle is going to be. And they might end up keeping 5 just because Jamarco Jones can play guard as well. And Jake Kieran's played some right guard in training
Right.
camp
Yeah.
and in preseason games. So he's got that working for him. He has shown that he's got a little more versatility than anticipated. He just started playing guard, he told me, in the Senior Bowl back in January. So he's still pretty new at that position, but he believes in ability at tackle. So those 3, they're maybe battling for one roster spot. And I went into camp thinking he was a lock to make this team. I don't know at this point, just because of how well Jake Kieran had played and the fact that he's been dealing with injuries. So there's going to be a lot riding in this game at the tackle position. Maybe Seattle's already made this decision, but I do find it interesting that Kieran's gotten a start at right tackle the last 2 games. He's taken advantage of the opportunity. He hasn't given up a single pressure in either one of those games. He improved as a run blocker in the second game against the Broncos. So the undrafted rookie is surging, and both the veterans got back to practice this week. And I think there's a big reason why. They saw in their rearview mirror number 74 coming at him fast. And so those 3 players going for one spot. The bubble is going to burst for at least one of those players, in my opinion. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. Betting on the NFL doesn't have to be a guessing game if you listen to the new Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day. Follow the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by betonline.ag, wherever you get podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. That's AUDACY. Coming up on our Blue Friday episode, I'm going to be playing Bubble Watch on the defensive side of the ball heading into Saturday's matchup. And, of course, breaking down some key storylines as the Seahawks prepare for their preseason finale against the Chargers. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.